Okay. On the August 12th, 2019, SD 350 Board of Education meeting to order. Welcome to our visitors. Any additions or changes to the agenda?
I have none.
Mr. President, I move the board approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. The board approve the agenda as presented. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. Consent agenda?
Nothing unusual to report there.
I'll move in just a minute here, but, you know, I skimmed through all of the checks and stuff, but the biology one got me this time, when I checked to see how much fetal pig was and how much the sheep side was.
The DNA kid.
Yeah. I looked at it, oh my God, that cost $68. I thought that was pretty funny. Mr. President, I move that the board approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. The board approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries 6-0. Any patron comments this evening? If not, we'll move on to the budget hearing. The budget hearing is now in session, open. Any comments related to the budget published July 31st, 2019? Anything? Hearing none, the budget hearing is now closed. Return to regular meeting. First on the business agenda, 2019-20 budget.
I'll go through some stuff here with you. You do have some, starting on page 31, some documents I might refer to here. There's a lot that goes into the budget. I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. In case you get questions, and if you have questions, feel free to speak up. But what goes into the budget, a lot of things affect that. All of those things listed there. Some of them are complicated, some of them are pretty straightforward. Our tax collections, you know, we have our tax increment financing with the grocery store, neighborhood revitalization when they improve a property and they don't tax it for a number of years. So we have to take into account all of those things when we put together the budget each year. Legislation, there was a significant increase in funding in the state. Base state aid is, for general fund in the state, it's up about 6.5%. We didn't quite see that because we had a drop in enrollment. The local option budget is similar to prior years where we can go up to 33%. The base aid will increase another 3% every year for the next 3 years, and then from then on it'll be tied to the consumer price index. So legislation-wise, the court says it's good enough, and with those planned increases in there, I think we're in pretty good shape. Moving forward. And the state's budget is in a lot better shape too. There's no danger of a crisis there like there has been for many years. So how we start and end the year really matters. I know I've shared this with you over the years. Our total cash balance is that in that purple line, and then the spendable cash is really what I pay attention to. It doesn't include capital outlay or the local option budget. We have some money there that we carry over each year that we can't touch. So our recreation funds end up with a balance. So we need to be 500,000-600,000 is ideally where we need to be. We're just below that. So we've worked pretty hard to get that up where it needs to be. So we're in pretty decent shape. Having legislation in place that we know what's going to happen down the road, we can probably deal with a little bit less than that 500,000 to 600,000 and still be pretty comfortable. So this is on page 31 on your supporting documents there. I know it's tough to read up here on the screen, but this just shows each of the funds where we carry over a balance. So we lost about 44,000 in our spendable cash from last year to this year. How did that happen? Well, we didn't get as much of an increase in funding as we'd anticipated. And we had we bumped up salaries for employees quite a bit. So really we went too far based on the with our salaries based on the funding that we were getting. How do we compare here? You know, Dale Dennis at KSD says we're okay, but we're definitely not flush with cash. So we could be doing a lot better. Valuation really affects our mill levy. You know, if the valuation dips, our mill levy goes up for the same dollars. And if the valuation is high, our mill levy goes down. So that's pretty simple. Valuation's up about 2%. That does affect our state aid rate and local option budget, or equalization aid that we get. So just a graphical representation of the recent history of what our valuation has done. It's pretty volatile here in our district because of oil. So if it was all just ag and real estate, it wouldn't be quite as volatile, but that oil really makes that jump up and down. Federal funds, we get $120,000, $130,000 in federal funds each year, so it makes a significant difference in our budget. So all of these title funds is where our money comes through for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So Title I is by far our highest dollar amount. And we get a handful for Perkins and then small rural schools. That's been pretty steady the last few years. We do need to watch that and make sure we're not going to see any decreases. So the budget is on page 32, the budget that I'm going to ask you to approve. That's what was published in the paper. Just some reminders. You know, this just sets our authority to spend money. We can't spend money that we don't have the authority to spend, that we didn't publish in the paper. And we can't, as cash basis law, we can't spend money that we don't have. You'll notice a lot of different budget funds. For the most part, we have to spend money out of those funds. If we have professional development, we have to spend it out of the professional development fund. If we have expenses for food service, we have to expend that money out of the food service fund. Some of those, the only way they get money into those funds is transfers. So we get all that money in the general fund or local option budget and we transfer it. And that shows as an expense. There's a few funds that budget authority doesn't apply to. If our budget isn't high enough for special ed and we have to spend more than that, we'd have to republish and have another hearing and approve a new budget, which is possible, but we can't do that with all the funds. Something like our federal funds, that's just a reimbursement. We spend it and we spend what we get. So if we go over budget there, it's not a big deal. But we watch that pretty closely. The transfers are tricky. Like I mentioned, a lot of the funds, they only get revenue from a transfer from the general fund or local option budget. State law says we have to transfer a certain amount to at-risk and to bilingual from the local option budget. One of those quirky changes in the law that really don't do any good for anybody. So the special education flow-through dollars, the state pays money to our co-op, but it flows through us. So it's paid to our general fund, we transfer it to our special ed fund, and then we cut the special ed co-op a check. We also pay them above and beyond that, but that state flow-through money, rather than going directly to the co-op, it comes to us and then to them. And that's almost $400,000. So take $400,000 of our budget that we don't have any control over. We just write a check for it, it comes in and goes right back out. So. Our mill levy, we have three funds: our general fund, local option budget, and capital outlay. Those are the three funds we levy a tax for. We also levy taxes for the Recreation Commission, as you know. General fund we don't control. We budget the dollars for the LOB and capital outlay. And we say that, we set our mill levy for the capital outlay, we say it's 8, or whatever mill levy we want, but then the dollars come in based on those estimates. So based on this year's budget, we're really about in line with what we've done the last 2 years. So this is by each of those three funds. Here's the 1920 is our budget for this year, so we're down about 2/10 of a mil. Page 33 under supporting documents shows a history of our taxes and how we so what's our mill levy been? So you can see it's bounced around. It's pretty much near the average for the last decade or so as far as mill levy. Now the dollars that we collect has been pretty flat for the last decade. Pretty much, depends on the valuation again. So our general fund is 20 mills. That money is paid to the county and they pay it directly to the state. That was a change in law a few years ago. It really doesn't affect us at all. We just don't have the spike in a big influx of cash like we used to. We still have a big influx for the other funds, but it's more evenly paid throughout the year. So our general fund is based on enrollment and then enrollment weightings. So for our general fund, we expect to see about $113,000 increase this year, which is pretty significant. So our enrollment for funding, we count the K-12 kids from last year or the previous year. What's nice about that is we know what our enrollment was last year and 2 years ago, so we can kind of plan, we know what our budget's going to be. Previous years we based it on this year. I wouldn't really know until our audit was done, and it could be spring of the current year. Then we add in our 4-year-old at risk, we do get some funding from there, and then we have the weightings. So smaller schools, we get a little bit of increase because it's more expensive to educate in a small school. It's more expensive to educate kids that are at risk. The kids we transport, there's additional expenses there. So, and then that special ed flow through that I talked about, they just add that in as a weighting. So we add all those up, that gives us our number for the general fund, take that times the base state aid. So that's where all that comes from. So if enrollment goes down, our budget will go down in future years. This is on page 35. So again, it's tough to see up here, but this lays out the increases in our general fund, what we would expect to see for the next few years. So this 1920 year, we kind of know what it's going to be. The weightings I'm not sure of, because we count those for this year. We still won't know on that until September 20. So there is still a little bit of uncertainty. So if we have a lot fewer kids, we'll have fewer weightings, so that will go down a little bit. And that's actually what happened this past year. So then we kind of know next year what our enrollment's going to be. If it goes up this year, that'd be good, but we know we can count on using that 314.5 number next year. So there's a little bit of certainty. So looking at about 80,000 for the next 3 years, and then after that, type of consumer price index. And that'll kind of make sense of where we're headed with our new state law and our funding increases. Here's been the recent history of our K-12 headcount. It's kind of been all over the board. I don't have a good estimate at all for you right now on where we're at for this year. We just had our enrollment. Wednesday, we've had several didn't come in, and trying to get folks to come in and get finished up. So we've lost some, we've gained some. So I hesitate to give you any sort of indication on where we're going to be at. Local option budget is 33% of the general fund. That's where it's at this year. Equalization aid, we get about 11, almost 12% from the state for that. Capital outlay, you know, we have a lot of needs there. We have our plan in place. Our maximum levy is 8 mills. We've set it at 8 mills for this year's budget. That's our maximum. This is one of those areas, budgeted versus expected expenses. We budget way high here. We don't expect to spend it all, but we put it in our budget that we will, just so we have authority in case something goes really wrong and we need that. Recreation Commission, We have two funds for that. Their general fund and then their employee benefit fund. The Recreation Commission certifies their budget. They publish it in the paper just like we do, and then they have a hearing and approve their budget just like we do. They certify that to Lisa, to our board clerk, and then we use that to levy our taxes based on what their budget is. Right now it's 3 mills. Where does that come from? It's been approved by the voters. Initially it was 1 mill. In the 80s, at some point it was increased another mill, and at some point it was increased another mill by the voters and by the school board over the years. In statute, it allows for 1 mill, up to 1 mill levy for employee benefit fund. So that wasn't voted on, that's just part of statute. So right now, the maximum they can get is 4 mills. It's been right at 3.7 since I've been here, as far as I can see, recent past. So tax dollars go to the county. It comes to us just like our other funds, and then we pay that to the Recreation Commission. It is subject to budget law. We give them what we take in from the county, except that we publish our budget. And some years, most years in fact, we get a little bit more than what our budget is. So there's a little bit of extra cash that builds up each year. So this is one of those years where we've got to kind of do a reset. So they're expecting $113,000 from us, but we're going to take some of that cash that's been sitting there and pay them that extra 10. That should help clean out that fund. So how does that happen? Well, every year it happens with our other funds too. In our local option budget, if we need to, well, let's just go back to the Recreation Commission. If they need $113,000, each year we collect about 92% of what we should get in our county, in our district. So when we build the budget, we could say, well, we expect to get 92% of the full levy, and if we levy based on that and it's a little less, then we'll be short, we won't have enough money to fund that budget. So we say, well, instead of 92%, we'll say 90%. So we underestimate what we're going to collect, so each year we get a little bit more, and then there just needs to be a little reset here and there. And the same thing happens with our LOB and our capital outlay and all of that. So one of those quirky things with the way those taxes work. So in summary, everything's pretty much the same, 0.2 mils lower, operational dollars up a little bit. Any questions on any part of that budget? Page 36, there's a one-page summary that we have to put on our website. That I'll be glad to answer questions about. I did include this, I didn't really go over it, but all the weightings. This is Form 150 on page 34. Tried to just simplify that a little bit.
Yeah, that page confused me.
Well, I'll explain it real quick. This is one of those that we have to put this on our website. Why? Because in law they said we have to put all these things on our website. I think so people that do the research that say schools are getting way too much money, they have easy access to the data and can spend their data the way they want. So it's a complicated form, but really this is how we budget how many kids we're going to have. Right here, that's our enrollment. So our preschool and our K-12, all of those. And then these are all the weightings that we get for low enrollment, for career and tech ed, for vocational programs, they're a little more expensive. Our at-risk students, they're a little bit more expensive. So all of these add up and add to our enrollment, basically. And then there's that special ed flow through, they just throw that in there because that flows through our general fund. And then the bottom line, we add all those up, our total FT is 682. So we have 315 kids, but or 322 kids, but You add all those weightings, so that's how we figure the budget, and based on that, all the weightings and everything. And then that's our base state aid, ticket times that gives us our general fund. So if anybody calls you about, what's this form about on the website, tell them to call the office. But I hate to put stuff out there that you guys have never really even seen, but we're required to put a lot of that out there. So.
Okay, questions
we
on
have
the
a
budget? Ending cash balance, steady.
down about 40.
Yeah,
Yeah.
been a struggle.
But
But better.
Yeah. And that's why we couldn't give us quite as good a raise as we wanted to this year. Already digging out of the hole from last year.
Yep. Anything else before we move to approve? Entertain a motion to approve the budget.
Mr. President, I move the board approve the 2019-20 budget as presented.
Second.
It's moved and seconded, the board approve the 2019-20 budget as presented. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. All right. Item 2, board policy updates.
We do have a separate document for that. We looked at these last month, just asking for final approval. The only thing, I didn't change the wording yet, but I wanted to match what we've got this year is on the nepotism policy. We're such a small district. Our current policy says, except after careful consideration, would we consider hiring anybody that's related to anybody on the board. So it doesn't prevent that, it's just, we need to make that clear to everybody before we approve it. That'd be the only difference on the policy from what's been presented.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
Mr. President, I move the board approve policy updates as presented.
Second.
It's moved and seconded, the board approve the policy updates as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. Item 3, library budget.
Library budget's on page 37. Very similar to last year's budget, increase for personnel costs. Just, you know, they're school district employees, so they got a raise just like everybody else did. So we increased for that. And pretty much everything else is the same as last year's budget. We're pretty consistently under budget there. So we give a little bit of a cushion there to make sure we're not over budget. So, you three that are on the interlocal board that had a chance to look at it ahead of time.
Okay, with it.
No problem with it.
Okay.
I'd ask for a motion to approve that.
Mr. President, I move that the board approve the 2019-20 library budget as presented.
Second. It's moved and seconded, the board approve the 2019-20 library budget as presented. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. Item 4, special education cooperative assessments.
That's on page 38. This is just the schedule of payments that we have to make. This is our local dollars that we pay above and beyond that state aid. It's based on our enrollment, so I asked the board to approve it, so we can just pay that as needed.
Mr. President, I move the board approve the special education assessment payment schedule as presented.
Second.
It's moved and seconded, the board approve the special education assessment payment schedule as presented. Is there any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. Item 5, information discussion housing project.
Stafford County Economic Development has been working with Kansas State, a professor at Kansas State University on some affordable housing in the county. There's a grant potential, a big grant for some affordable housing. You know, that's been a priority for economic development for several years now. What they're working on is building homes from structural insulated panels. So it'd be foam-filled panels that come, pre-assembled. They can't even come with the windows already in them, or they just have the windows cut, but they just stand them up and screw them all together. And easy assembly, so a lot of the assembly or the construction is done off-site. Looking at one of our lots by the tennis courts to potentially put a house. And I'd been talking with Carolyn and the professor about the possibility of our kids being involved in this project. If K-State students are going to build this house, how could we be involved in that? Because it'd be right there. So Blaine and I and Mr. Moritz and Carolyn met in an online meeting with this Michael Gibson. He's the professor, and talked about what might be possible. So this is kind of tough to read, but this just lays out his suggestion of how the project might look. They're doing most of the work in Manhattan. They're doing the design, but they're going to include us. So they would come down, visit us. They'd be visiting the Economic Development Board because they'd be kind of in charge of it. And they'd come meet with the kids. We could take our kids up to their design studio and see how they do that. They would be involved in any presentations here in our community. They would build a model, build a small-scale model of the project and learn from that. And then second semester is this. They would begin building. So they'd be building the panels up at K-State. We could go visit them. We could help with site prep back here, the concrete work, any of that stuff. And then when they get everything ready, there'd be kind of a barn raising. Get everybody together and put the building up, and then all the finish work would come. So it's not something that would be like an all-year class where the kids are in that class building a house all year, but this could be where Mr. Moritz's kids periodically are involved. Maybe we take them out of class for a day and they go up to Manhattan. Or that during those 2 weeks where they're building, the kids come over when they can. So they're still doing their other projects. They're still doing their welding, they're still making their gun cabinet, whatever. But this would be just taking all those kids, and it's a pretty neat learning opportunity, I think.
And we would probably include most all of Mr. Moritz's classes in that, metals and everything, at least in part of it, as far as the design and everything. The other thing the professor mentioned, I don't think he put it on here, was potentially sending the pieces here for our kids to assemble cabinets in here. So, and maybe bring a couple K-State kids down here to help them put those together so they're assembled here in St. John. Right.
What's the cost to us?
Nothing.
Okay, just the land?
Yes. Economic development would be funding the project, and there's some foundation grants at K-State. So economic development would own the property, so we wouldn't have to own it, hire a general contractor or anything. We would just have our kids involved as a learning opportunity.
When the project's sold, does all the money go to economic development, or what happens with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's with this grant at least, it would be more for rental housing, is the idea. So the whole project and grant for the housing is still up in the air. But this project, I think the funds are available to make it work, even if the grant doesn't happen. At least this one house they can make work.
Help me understand, we would donate the property, or we would get paid for their property?
Well, that's what we would need to decide. Economic development would like it donated,
I'm sure.
and we had put those properties up for sale, pretty firm at $7,500, and there's been other people I've told that it's a firm price at $7,500. This is a different entity. It's not a private individual. and our kids being involved in the project, I think is huge.
Could we do something where maybe we get paid on the back end once they get paid? And I don't know full amount, but just so we aren't giving away the total value of our property. But, I don't know, bounce back and forth as tight as we are, how much we should just flat out give away an asset. But I like the idea of our students being involved.
So this will be a rental and not a house for sale?
Well, I don't know what's gonna end up happening with this one property, but that's the idea with this affordable housing, that it would be more for rentals.
Because I could see some of the neighbors not liking a rental coming in. They would rather see a nice house being built there that's for sale.
Right.
But I think it's a good opportunity for the kids.
How many kids do you think there are in all our shop classes?
15 to 20?
Yeah.
So,
And they would all be involved.
Mhm. Yep.
Some may
Some
be
way.
more involved than others. You know, the woodworking may be more involved than the metals class.
Who does the plumbing and the electrical? Is that all through K-State?
Yeah, then we would get involved in that.
Okay,
But they would, this is gonna require hiring a general contractor.
okay.
Because even, they're still students too. I mean, they're college architecture and design students. They get in on the construction, but they're not construction experts.
The panels are slick, that's what I used for my house. Shawnee
Is
used
it?
to help set the
Yeah.
walls one day.
Is this something that could be ongoing, or is this a one-time deal?
Yeah, it could be ongoing.
So our kids could have multiple years of...
Could be, yes.
Okay.
Maybe next project could be a daycare center.
Yeah.
The ongoing would be dependent upon being able to secure grants.
Yeah.
I think from what I understood.
So it's still in the early stages of deciding whether we can make this work, but for you all to think about, I guess, whether it's feasible for us to donate the lot for the building of this house. So I'm not asking you to decide that today, but
Well, what is their timeframe? Do you have
I'm
any?
going to start this fall. So I told Carolyn that we would discuss it tonight and wouldn't ask for any sort of action on it, on the property until next month. So.
Guess we need some more information.
On the project itself, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else, anyone?
I think it's awesome, and I know that there are people always looking for rental properties, so I understand the concern, but when I was looking for a rental, there was just, there's just nothing, so, and I can't imagine if somebody had to go through economic development, that there would be just, they would be a responsible landowner, not an absentee owner, like some of the properties that are in town. I'm 100% for it.
Any other questions for Mr. Meyer for next time? Are you planning to bring this back next
Mhm.
month?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, everyone think about it, and if you have questions, contact Mr. Meyer this month. It's definitely interesting. All right. On to communications.
board member activities and reports. Derek? Anything, Vance?
Nope.
Sean? Nope. Debbie? Carl?
Nope.
It's been a quiet summer. Nothing for me.
We have a new director and a new associate director that took over last month at the special ed co-op. There's some things coming up on the agenda this month, but last month was pretty easy.
Yep. Okay. Administrative reports. What?
I don't have much. We had enrollment Wednesday, and we still have several kids to come in and work schedules out and stuff. Still got some things I've got to do adjustment-wise on the schedule, but we're getting there. Have our fall parent sports meeting Thursday night. Back to school bash on the 24th. I think we have, like Josh said, we have a handful of students not coming back because families moving or whatever. We have a few that are coming in, so I have no clue on our numbers, really, not at this point. I'd love to ask if you have any questions. I didn't give you much info to ask questions about.
Anything else? Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Spanish classes, we've kind of been up in the air. As you know, Stafford, they worked out a special arrangement to get the teacher that we had hired over there to teach some 6th grade and Spanish, and there was absolutely zero communication about that. Before that happened, in fact, the communication that we had ahead of time was that no, we still need to work together. That changed pretty quickly. So that special arrangement that they created put us in a real bind, and so we've been looking. We have had 0 applicants for that Spanish position. So we're stuck with our online situation. We've got our online lab that really the kids can come over and they can take any classes, college classes, but really they've all got a device, they can do it anywhere. So we have a couple hours where they'll do the online Spanish.
Yeah, really the Spanish might end up split up where 2 or 3 of them are this hour and 2 or 3 of them are that hour, and since they have their own devices, some of them may be in with like Mrs. Kinnaman has the other room back there in her lab, so that's what we're trying to work out the schedules on, is to get every kid what they want. But we've had a lot of kids, when they find out it's online, they're not near as interested in taking it, a lot of kids. So, and we promised them that we're going to continue to look for a Spanish teacher, so there's potential to have one next year if we can line something up.
And we might be able to work something out with Maxville and sharing a teacher there as well. If we can have trust with that district, we could probably do something over there. Our Power School implementation, we're getting that. It's gone slower than I wanted, but we're there. We've got our office staff trained. We weren't able to get our online enrollment. We were just to that point where we've got to mail stuff out, or we've got to know it's going to be ready, and we just got to that point where forget it, we'll just do it on paper and get it going next year. So we've got a lot of data in. Teachers are coming in Thursday and Friday this week for their training.
And we are having to enter a lot of that data by hand. People in that, so it's a little slow.
Post-secondary success on page 43, this is new data. I know we've looked at this stuff before, but this is the new data. So the yellow is our graduation rate. The pink is our success rate. So if kids got a degree or continued on in post-secondary, 2 years out of school, that's the percentage of those kids. And then the dark blue would be include all the high school dropouts. So on the 5-year average of all the kids that enter St. John High School, 52% of them are successful 2 years out. Post-secondary education, successful. Not successful, but just successful on that metric. So that's higher than it was last year, so it's bumped up a little bit. This is the...
Sorry to interrupt.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm sure I've asked this before. How accurate is that information post? I mean, how do you gather that?
Pretty accurate. The universities report it. This doesn't include military. Military doesn't report their data. So a kid goes into the military, doesn't show up as a successful on post-secondary education. It's not that that kid's not successful, but according to this measure, kid goes right into the workforce and is making $60,000 a year, doesn't go to post-secondary education, doesn't show up here as successful, because that's just post-secondary education success. But this data is pulled from all the universities. There's a few that are not accredited that may not show up, but Kansas has done a lot of work to make sure that data is being reported. But
I think every college in Kansas, every university in Kansas now reports.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it's not perfect by any means. And we do have to keep in mind it is just one metric. It's not, taking over the family farm is successful, but maybe you didn't get a degree to do that. So it's just one piece of things. And then based on the makeup of our community, this is the range here that they would expect us to be. So we're a little above that. So it's not fair to compare us to Blue Valley Northwest High School. And their clientele's a little bit different than ours. So it's important to compare where, based on our community, where should we be based on data. Any questions on that report? One item on here I did not have is a big part of our work this year will be on becoming a trauma-informed school. We've done a lot of work on this. We're looking at poverty and the effect of trauma on kids. Having a tough life and being in poverty aren't necessarily, they're not the same thing. We have kids that don't grow up in poverty that have a lot of trauma. So I thought it was important because we're spending a lot of time and money on that this year, and we will over the next couple of years, and we have already. I want to make sure you all are on the same page with what we're talking about here and why it's important. So bear with me a few minutes. I want to show some of these things to you.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems, and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation, and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Okay, this adverse childhood experience is more globally looking at health and well-being of the population. But for our work here at school, our focus is a little more narrowed. A good example, we went and listened to some professional development in Lions last year about brain research and the stress response. All these adverse experiences rewires the brain. And your brain, and the example they use is with the hand, your brain stem, that's where your fight or flight is, all the emotional response and the stress. So when you're in the wild and you see a tiger, your ancestors would, to see a tiger, that stress triggers a response. I got to get out of here. That's good stress, right? And then the other parts of your brain, the emotional side of things, and the side that controls the communication and rational thought, all those things work together. So when you see a paper tiger, I'm immediately stressed, but the other parts of my brain, the rational thought is, okay, I don't need to be afraid of that, I'm going to be okay. But for kids that have been in these stressful situations their whole lives, none of that's talking to each other, so it's only on that fight or flight. So when I perceive a threat, it's just a pretend tiger, but I react like it's real. So when a kid is not regulated, they've been through these adverse experiences, and the kid throws a pencil across the class and the teacher screams at the kid, that triggers a response. I get yelled at home, whatever. That's a threat. Well, I can't treat that kid the same as I treat my own kid because their response is different. And why? Because their brains are wired different because of this stuff that we're talking about here. It's not that we don't have expectations, we still need to work through it, but we have to understand that the kids perceive those threats and they're going through life differently. Their brains are wired differently. And our challenge right now is that we're still in the early stages is, yeah, the kids have been through some tough stuff, but we don't just let them get away with whatever they want, right? So that's part of our professional development is digging in further with this information and how we work with kids. It's pretty powerful stuff. So I just want to make sure you guys knew a little bit about what we're doing in this area of things. But the time and money we spend working with kids that have trouble, that social emotional learning, that takes away from everybody. So the better we can do with that, the better we're going to be across the board. So that's our focus for this year and the next couple of years. But any quick questions on that? I left a sheet here with you on that you can take with you. Continuing on with my report, enrollment. We already talked about that. So maintenance update, that kitchen freezer building, waiting on one part to get that drainage out of there. I haven't talked to Isai today. It was on back order and he was going to get it in as soon as he could. But otherwise, it's done. The freezer's on and it's cooling. So we'll need to do some work on the interior, but we'll get the shelves in there and probably have to build some walls, make it a little better space. Library carpet. There's a couple of rooms that Ben's got to get done, clearing the back, that he'll get done as we can. But the bulk of it is done. Looks great.
How's the box floor turn out?
Good, good. The other flooring in the other building, they're still working on polishing the concrete in the hall by the shop. The fax, we need to go back with tile in that kitchen. Band and music, those are getting repaired, almost done. And then he's going to work on that terrazzo floor by the main gym, putting some epoxy repair and polishing that, and those big nasty cracks in there. So, gym floors are done. They look fantastic. If you haven't got a chance to look at them, come by and see them. Boilers, I didn't see the guys out there this week, but I wasn't in a whole lot today. I didn't check, but they're supposed to be in this week and they'll get them installed. So we're in good shape on a lot of major maintenance projects we've had going. So the pickup and drop-off area, I think we're all ready. They've got to get the street signs in, the one-way street signs, all that official stuff on their end, but looks good. I think it's going to work well. Communication has been, I know the city sent something out, and we've tried to get stuff out on Facebook, get that information to parents. So.
Heard lots of positive comments in the community.
Yeah. I think it's going to work well, so. That's all I had for my report.
Okay, thank you. Executive session tonight. Have personnel.
Yep, got a few easy items, I think, maybe 10 minutes.
Okay, with who?
The board.
Just you. For 10 minutes. Who wants to do the motion?
Mr. President, I move the board go into executive session to discuss specific individuals being hired or resigning pursuant to non-elected personnel exception under KOMA. Mr. Meyer to be included, and we return to open session at 8:05.
Second.
It's moved and seconded the board go into executive session to discuss specific individuals being hired or resigning pursuant to the non-elected personnel exception under KOMA with Mr. Meyer to be included. And we return to open session at 8:05 in this room. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Motion carried. Mr. Meyer, you have recommendations?
I do. I have a letter of resignation here from Estrella Fernandez as a teacher aide. I recommend approving that resignation.
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded to accept the resignation of Estrella Fernandez. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried 6-0. Others?
I have a letter of resignation here from Tim McKiernan for transportation maintenance. I recommend approving that resignation.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the resignation of Tim McKiernan from Transportation Maintenance Director. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried 6-0.
Recommend approving Mark Bryant for the concession coordinator position.
So motion.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to hire Mike Bryant as the concession stand coordinator. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 5-1. Others?
Recommend hiring Jerry Munden as the transportation maintenance coordinator.
Second.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to hire Jerry Munden as the transportation maintenance coordinator. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carried, 6-0. Other future agenda items?
We have our building tour, we'll go take a look at everything. Building next month, it's a pretty light meeting. We do have to decide on our copiers, what we want to do with those. And then I should have a better idea on enrollment numbers for you next month. That's all I have so far.
Okay, motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Moved and seconded, we adjourn. All in favor, aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries 6-0, we are adjourned.
Hey, you guys are in a hurry to get out?